Before proceeding, let's quickly review the definitions of arteries and veins, as well as the significance of the red and blue color coding. Our definition of an artery is it takes blood away from the heart. The aorta, which supplies blood to the systemic circulation, and the pulmonary trunk, which supplies blood to the lungs, are examples of arteries. Veins return blood to the heart, the superior vena cava, bringing blood back from the systemic circulation, and the pulmonary veins bringing blood back from the lungs are examples of veins. Oxygenated blood, that is blood that is high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide, is color-coded red, and blood vessels that carry oxygenated blood are color-coded red. Deoxygenated blood is blood that is low in oxygen, high in carbon dioxide, and blood vessels and portions of the heart that carry deoxygenated blood are color-coded blue. Also recall that the heart is really two pumps, with the right ventricle pumping deoxygenated blood to the lungs via the pulmonary arteries, and oxygenated blood returning to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins. The implications of this are that when we are talking about the blood vessels of the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary veins are going to be the red color-coded blood vessels, and the pulmonary arteries are going to be the blue color-coded blood vessels. I want to emphasize this is only in the pulmonary circuit. So these are going to be the blood vessels that are sending blood to the lungs or bringing blood back from the lungs. The only blood vessels of the pulmonary circuit that you will be identifying are the pulmonary arteries and pulmonary veins. Therefore, all other blood vessels will be from the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit takes oxygenated blood from the heart via the aorta. So we have oxygenated blood passing through arteries, which will be color-coded red, and deoxygenated blood returning via veins to the right atrium. In the systemic circulation, the arteries will be color-coded red and the veins will be color-coded blue. And except for the pulmonary arteries and veins, all of the blood vessels you'll be identifying will be of the systemic circulation. Let's start with the arteries. Here's the list from your study guide, and it may look like quite a large number of arteries that you have to identify, and it is. However, if you notice a few key features about arteries, they can be quite easy to learn in a very short period of time. First, the names of the arteries are very descriptive. They are named after the body regions in which they're found or nearby bones. So if you know your body regions, which you should, and your bones, which you also should, it becomes fairly easy to learn the names of these arteries. Second, realize that every time there is a branch, the artery changes its name. For example, let's say we have this long blood vessel or tube. And let's say at this point it has some name, artery X, let's call it. And then there's a branch. Then it will become artery Y. And then there's a branch and it'll change its name to artery Z. So every time there is a branch, the artery changes its name. Why does it do that? Well, it's so as a scientist or a clinician, we can be very specific as to where on that tube we are referring to. Something else we know about the blood of the systemic circulation can also help us in studying the arteries. We know, of course, that all blood of the systemic circulation leaves the heart by the aorta. That knowledge, with the knowledge that every time there's a branch, the artery changes its names, makes it very effective to study the arteries like roads on a map. We want to start here at the aorta and then follow the blood as it passes through blood vessels on its way to the head. Follow the blood as it passes through the aorta, through the shoulder, and then down to the upper appendages. Starting at the aorta and following blood as it descends into the abdominal region and then finally down to the lower appendages. Studying the arteries like roads on a map. Now let's put this method of studying the arteries into action. So we're going to learn the arteries of the upper appendages. We're going to start at the aorta. Notice that the heart's been removed, but we don't really need it. We know where it is. We're going to start at the aortic arch because we know that blood leaves the heart through the aortic arch, and we're going to follow that blood as it passes through the arteries on its way to the upper appendage. Blood leaves the aortic arch and enters the brachiocephalic artery. Now let's break that word down. Brachio refers to arm, cephalic refers to head. Notice that the blood passing through the brachiocephalic artery is headed toward the head and the arm, and that's where it gets its name. Now we're interested in the arm, so we're not going to follow that blood to the head, but that branch causes the artery to change its name. And so right after that branch, it becomes the right subclavian artery. Subclavian. Sub means below. Clavian refers to the clavicle. Notice that that artery dives below the clavicle, and that's where it gets its name. And right after it passes underneath the clavicle, there's a branch, and it changes its name to the axillary artery, named for the axillary region, the armpit. Then there's another branch, and it changes its name to the brachial artery. Then the artery right past the elbow divides and runs along the radius as the radial artery and along the ulna as the ulnar artery. So it's quite easy to learn the names of these arteries if we study them like roads. There are 3 arteries that supply blood to the head that you are responsible for knowing. So let's come back to the aorta and follow the blood on its journey toward the head. So coming off of the aorta, we have the brachiocephalic artery again, but this time we're going to follow the blood as it goes toward the head rather than the arm. So that branch becomes the common carotid artery. By the way, when you feel the carotid pulse in someone's neck, you're feeling the pressure wave of blood as it passes through that common carotid artery. The word common means that that blood vessel is going to split or divide and keep its same name. The common carotid artery divides into the internal carotid artery, which supplies blood to the deeper portions of the head, and the external carotid artery, which provides blood to the more superficial portions of the head. Before we continue looking at specific arteries, I want to address something you may have noticed on the study guide. For some of the arteries, I use the singular. For others, I use the plural, arteries. Same for veins. Sometimes I use veins. Sometimes I use veins, the plural. What is the significance of that? If the blood vessels are symmetrical on both sides of the body, you do not have to use the adjectives left and right to describe them because they look the same on the right and left side. If they are asymmetrical, you will have to use the adjectives left and right. For those that are symmetrical, I use the plural on the study guide. For those that are not symmetrical, I used the singular form. Now, what do I mean by symmetrical on both sides? The human body basically has what is called bilateral symmetry. One side of our body is a mirror image of the other. And so structures on the right side in general look the same as structures on the left. There are, of course, some exceptions. We have a liver on the right side of the body. We don't have a liver on the left side. We have 3 lobes of the right lung. We only have 2 on the left. So there are some exceptions, and the blood vessels are no different. For most of the blood vessels, arteries and veins, they're symmetrical on both sides. And you'll notice that on your study guide, I use the plural forms for most. There are a few that are asymmetrical. And on the study guide, I used the left and right adjectives, and I also listed them singularly. For example, we can look at a few here that come right off of the aorta. Did you notice that there's a brachiocephalic artery on the right side, but there's not one on the left? Coming right off the aorta, we have the brachiocephalic artery. It then branches into a right subclavian artery and a right common carotid artery. Well, what about the left side? Well, we have no brachiocephalic artery. The left common carotid comes right off the aorta, and the left subclavian artery comes right off of the aorta. So they don't look the same on both sides of the body. They're asymmetrical. So for these, and these are most of the ones that are asymmetrical. I think there's 2 or 3 others actually that are remaining on your study guide. All right, for these, I do expect you to include left and right, except for the brachiocephalic because it's only on the right, and so it's understood. Now, your instructor may not hold you to this rule, and they may not care that you have to use the left and the right. So if you're not sure, ask your instructor. But for my students, I do expect for any blood vessel that is asymmetrical that they use the left and right adjectives in their answers.